When I walked into my kitchen that Tuesday morning and saw Martin sitting at the breakfast table, reading his newspaper, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just torn my heart into 1,000 pieces the night before, I knew something inside me had fundamentally changed. For 35 years, I had stood in that exact spot making his coffee, scrambling his eggs exactly the way he liked them, with just a pinch of salt and a dash of pepper. 35 years of getting up before dawn to pack his lunch, iron his shirts, and make sure his world ran smoothly while he climbed the corporate ladder. But that morning, for the first time in decades, I didn't reach for the coffee pot. I didn't start cracking eggs. Instead, I stood there, looking at this man who had become a stranger to me, remembering every word he had screamed at me just 12 hours earlier. "You are absolutely useless, Patricia. Do you hear me? Useless." His voice had been cold, calculated, like he had been storing up these words for years, just waiting for the right moment to destroy me with them. 35 years. And what do you have to show for it? What value do you bring to this marriage? You don't work. You don't contribute financially. You just exist in this house like some kind of parasite. Those words had hit me like a physical blow. A parasite. After 35 years of devotion, of sacrifice, of putting his needs before my own every single day, he saw me as a parasite. I had stood there in our living room, still holding the dish towel I had been using to dry the plates from the dinner I had spent 2 hours preparing, the dinner he had barely touched because he was too busy complaining about his day at work. "Martin," I had whispered, my voice barely audible, "how can you say that to me? I have given you everything." He had laughed then, a harsh sound that cut through me like broken glass. "Given me what? A clean house? Meals? Any maid could do that. Any maid would probably do it better and cost me less money." The cruelty in his voice was something I had never heard before, even though I had seen glimpses of this man emerging over the past few years. The man who had started treating me like hired help instead of his wife. The man who had stopped saying thank you for anything I did, who had started acting like my efforts were not just expected, but somehow insufficient. That Tuesday morning, as I stood in my kitchen watching him turn the pages of his newspaper with the same hands that had once held me tenderly, I realized that I had been slowly disappearing, not just from his sight, but from my own. I had become so focused on being the perfect wife, the perfect homemaker, the perfect invisible support system for his life, that I had forgotten I was a person with my own worth, my own dreams, my own right to be treated with basic human dignity. The coffee maker sat silent on the counter. His favorite mug, the blue one with the chip on the handle that I had been meaning to replace for months, remained empty in the cabinet. For the first time in 35 years, I was not taking care of Martin first thing in the morning. Instead, I was taking care of myself. I was protecting what was left of my heart. "Where's my coffee, Pat?" Sonny, he asked, without looking up from his newspaper, his voice carrying that tone of casual expectation that had become so familiar. He wasn't asking. He was commanding, the way someone might ask where they had left their keys or their wallet. I was just another household convenience that was malfunctioning. "Make it yourself," I said quietly. He looked up then, his eyebrows raised in surprise. "What did you say?" I said, "Make it yourself, Martin. I'm not your maid." The newspaper rustled as he set it down completely, giving me his full attention for the first time in months. "What's gotten into you? You're acting strange. Strange. As if standing up for myself after decades of servitude was some kind of mental breakdown. As if expecting basic respect from my own husband was an unreasonable demand. I could see it in his eyes. The complete bewilderment. He genuinely could not understand why I wasn't jumping to fulfill his morning routine. I'm not acting strange, Martin. I'm acting like a person who deserves better than being called useless by her own husband. He waved his hand dismissively, the same gesture he had been using more and more frequently whenever I tried to express any kind of feeling or opinion. Don't be so dramatic, Pat. You know I didn't mean it like that. I was frustrated about work. You're being too sensitive, too sensitive. The phrase that had become his favorite weapon whenever he wanted to avoid taking responsibility for his words. Too sensitive when he forgot my birthday 3 years in a row. Too sensitive when he stopped introducing me to his colleagues at company events. Too sensitive when he started treating me like furniture in my own home. No, Martin. You meant every word. And you know what? I heard every single one of them. I walked out of the kitchen then, leaving him sitting there with his empty coffee cup and his newspaper. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, the bedroom where we had once shared dreams and hopes and plans for the future, the bedroom where he now slept with his back turned to me every night, where conversations had dwindled to logistics about household maintenance and social obligations. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around at the life I had built for us, the carefully chosen curtains, the family photos arranged just so on the dresser, the fresh flowers I replaced every week, whether he noticed or not. Everything in this room, everything in this house, bore the mark of my care, my attention, my love, but somehow, in his eyes, all of that had become nothing. The photo on my nightstand caught my attention. It was from our 10th anniversary, both of us smiling at the camera in front of the restaurant where we had celebrated. I looked so young, so hopeful. Martin's arm was around my waist, and he was looking at me like I was the most precious thing in his world. When had that look disappeared? When had I stopped being precious and started being useless? I picked up the phone and dialed my sister Denise's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful as always. "Good morning, sunshine. What's got you calling so early?" "Denise," I said, and my voice broke on her name. "I need to talk to someone." "Oh, honey, what's wrong? You sound like you've been crying." I told her everything. About the fight, about Martin's words, about the years of feeling invisible in my own marriage, about how I had gradually become smaller and smaller until I wondered if I would disappear entirely. Denise listened without interrupting, making soft sounds of understanding and support. "Patricia," she said when I finished, "you know this isn't right. You know you deserve better than this. But what am I supposed to do, Denise? I'm 57 years old. I haven't worked outside the home in 35 years. I have no career, no income of my own. Where would I go? What would I do? Baby sister, you are one of the strongest, most capable women I know. You have been running a household, managing finances, maintaining relationships, solving problems, and keeping everyone around you happy and healthy for decades. Those are skills. That is work. That is valuable work." Her words felt like cool water on a burn. For so long, I had internalized Martin's view that what I did wasn't real work, wasn't valuable contribution. But Denise was right. I had been working. I had been contributing. I had been building something meaningful, even if Martin could no longer see it. You remember when Mama used to tell us that a woman's worth isn't determined by how much a man appreciates her? Denise continued. She used to say that we had to know our own value first, and then demand that the world recognize it too. Our mother had been a wise woman, raised in a time when women had fewer choices, but somehow seemed to have more clarity about their own strength. She had taught us that love without respect was just pretty words, and that no one could make us feel small without our permission. I've been giving him permission to treat me this way, I realized out loud. Every time I accepted less than I deserved, every time I made excuses for his behavior, every time I convinced myself that keeping the peace was more important than keeping my dignity. And now? Denise asked gently. Now I'm done giving him that permission. After I hung up with Denise, I sat in that bedroom for another hour, thinking about the woman I used to be before I became Martin's wife. I had been confident, ambitious, full of dreams about the life I wanted to build. I had wanted to travel, to learn new things, to make a difference in the world. Somehow, over the years, those dreams had gotten buried under the daily routine of taking care of everyone else's needs. But they weren't dead. They were just sleeping, waiting for me to remember them. I heard Martin's car pull out of the driveway as he left for work. He hadn't come upstairs to say goodbye, hadn't apologized for his words from the night before. In the old days, I would have run downstairs to catch him, would have smoothed over the tension with a kiss and a promise that everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine, and I was tired of pretending it was. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the library, not to pick up books for Martin or to research something for the house. I went for me. I sat in the quiet reading room and looked through books about women starting over later in life. I read stories about women who had found their strength after decades of doubt, women who had discovered that their worth wasn't tied to how well they served others, but to how well they honored themselves, themselves. One of the books caught my attention immediately. It was called Second Chances After 50, and the woman on the cover looked like she could have been my sister. She had that same look of quiet determination that I was beginning to recognize in my own reflection. As I flipped through the pages, I found stories that felt like they had been written about my own life. Women who had spent decades being told they were nothing without their husbands. Women who had discovered their own power just when everyone expected them to fade away. I checked out 3 books that day. Not just the one about starting over, but also a cookbook featuring recipes from around the world and a guide to community college programs for mature students. For the first time in years, I was thinking about what I wanted, not what Martin needed. When I got home, Martin was already there, sitting in his recliner with a beer and the television remote. He looked up when I walked in with my library books, his expression curious. "Where have you been all day?" "Dinner's not started." I set my books down on the coffee table and looked at him directly. "I was at the library, and you're right. Dinner isn't started. I guess you'll have to figure something out for yourself tonight." His face went through several expressions before settling on irritation. "Patricia, what is this nonsense? Are you having some kind of midlife crisis? Because I don't have time for dramatic games. This isn't a game, Martin. This is me finally waking up to the fact that I've been living like a ghost in my own life." He muted the television and turned his full attention to me, which would have thrilled me just a week ago. Now it felt calculated, like he was trying to figure out how much effort he needed to put in to get his comfortable life back on track. "Look, if this is about last night, I already told you I was frustrated. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. I didn't marry you to have you fall apart every time I have a bad day at work." The casual cruelty of his words was breathtaking. Even now, even after seeing how much he had hurt me, he couldn't bring himself to offer a real apology. He couldn't acknowledge that calling me useless might have been wrong. Instead, he was making my pain about his inconvenience. You didn't marry me to have a maid either, Martin, but that's what I became, and I let it happen. Oh, for crying out loud, Patricia. You're being ridiculous. You have a good life here, a beautiful home, financial security, a husband who provides for you. Most women would be grateful. Grateful. I should be grateful for being treated like hired help in my own home. Grateful for having my contributions dismissed and my feelings ignored. Grateful for a husband who saw me as a burden rather than a partner. You know what, Martin? You're absolutely right. I should be grateful, and I am. I'm grateful that your cruelty finally opened my eyes to what I've been accepting all these years. I picked up my books and headed toward the stairs. Behind me, I heard him call out, "Don't think you can guilt me into apologizing, Patricia. I'm not the villain here. You're the one acting crazy." Ah, crazy. Another one of his favorite words for any behavior that didn't serve his comfort. I was crazy when I wanted to visit my sister more than once a year. Crazy when I suggested we needed to talk about our marriage. Crazy when I asked him to help with household tasks. Any deviation from being his silent, efficient caretaker was labeled as mental instability. That night, I made myself a simple dinner and ate it alone in the kitchen, while Martin ordered pizza for himself. We moved around each other like strangers, which I suppose we had been for longer than I wanted to admit. I had been so busy being the wife I thought he wanted that I had forgotten to be the woman I actually was. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, and instead of immediately thinking about Martin's breakfast, I thought about myself. I made coffee for one and sat at the kitchen table with my library books spread out in front of me. The community college catalog was particularly interesting. They had programs for adult learners, financial aid options, even childcare for students with young children. Not that I needed childcare anymore, but it showed they understood that life doesn't always follow a straight path. Martin came downstairs dressed for work, moving through his usual morning routine. He opened the cabinet where his coffee mug should have been, found it empty, and turned to look at me with expectation. "Coffee's over there," I said, without looking up from my catalog. "Help yourself." He stood there for a moment, clearly waiting for me to get up and serve him, like I had every morning for 35 years. When I didn't move, he huffed and poured his own coffee with the dramatic flair of someone performing an enormous sacrifice. "This is getting old, Patricia. How long are you planning to keep up this act?" "It's not an act, Martin. This is just me, not being your personal servant anymore." "Personal servant?" His voice rose with indignation. "Is that what you think you are? You're my wife. We're partners." I looked up from my catalog then, really looked at him. "Partners? When was the last time you asked my opinion about anything important? When was the last time you thanked me for anything I did for you? When was the last time you treated me like an equal instead of like household staff?" He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. I could see him thinking, searching through his memory for examples that would prove me wrong. The silence stretched between us as he came up empty. "That's different," he finally said. "You chose this life. You wanted to be a homemaker. I chose to be your wife, Martin. I chose to build a life with you as my partner. I didn't choose to be invisible. I didn't choose to be taken for granted. And I certainly didn't choose to be called useless." He grabbed his briefcase and headed toward the door. "Fine. If you want to be independent so badly, Maybe you should figure out how to pay some bills around here. See how useless you really are." The door slammed behind him, rattling the windows and confirming everything I had been realizing about the man I had married. When challenged, when asked to examine his own behavior, he became cruel. When confronted with the possibility that he might need to change, he chose to punish me instead. But his words didn't sting the way they would have a week ago. Instead, they clarified something for me. He was right about one thing. I did need to figure out how to pay bills. I did need to become financially independent. Not because I was useless, but because I was finally ready to discover just how capable I actually was. That afternoon, I called the community college and made an appointment with an admissions counselor. I hadn't been in school in almost 40 years, but the woman on the phone was encouraging and kind. She told me about their programs for returning students, about financial aid options, about the support services they offered for people starting new chapters in their lives. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, "you'd be surprised how many women in their 50s and 60s are coming back to school. Some want new careers, some want to finish degrees they started years ago. Some just want to prove to themselves that they can do it. What brings you here?" "I want to prove to myself that I'm not useless," I said, and then immediately felt embarrassed by the honesty. "Honey," she said gently, "anyone who raised a family and ran a household for 35 years is anything but useless. You just need some updated skills and a piece of paper that proves what you already know about yourself." Her kindness almost made me cry. It had been so long since someone had spoken to me with basic respect and encouragement that it felt overwhelming. That evening, Martin came home to find me at the kitchen table with college applications spread out in front of me. His face went through several emotions before settling on what looked like panic. "What is all this, Patricia?" "College applications. I'm going back to school." "School? You're 57 years old. What do you need school for?" "To learn things. To grow. To become the person I was meant to be before I got lost in being your wife." He sat down across from me, his expression shifting to what I recognized as his negotiation face, the same expression he used when he was trying to close a difficult deal at work. "Honey, let's be reasonable here. You don't need college. You have everything you need right here. Besides, school is expensive. It doesn't make financial sense at your age. At my age." As if 57 was ancient. As if I was already dead and just hadn't noticed yet. As if the next 30 years of my life weren't worth investing in. "I've already looked into financial aid, Martin. And I have some savings of my own." His eyebrows shot up. "Savings? What savings?" I had never told him about the small account I had been building over the years. $20 here, $50 there, saved from the household budget when I found good deals or clipped coupons. It wasn't much, but it was mine. My little secret rebellion against complete financial dependence. "I've been saving money for years, Martin. Just small amounts, but it adds up. That's household money, Patricia. That's not your money." And there it was, the truth that had been underlying our entire marriage. In his mind, nothing was mine. Not the money I saved, not the work I did, not even my own feelings and reactions to his treatment of me. Everything belonged to him, and I was just the caretaker of his possessions. Actually, Martin, it's money I saved through careful budgeting and smart shopping. Money that wouldn't have existed if I hadn't been managing our household efficiently. So yes, it is my money. He stared at me like I had just announced I was planning to fly to the moon. The concept that I might have my own resources, my own plans, my own agency in this marriage was so foreign to him that he literally couldn't process it. You can't be serious about this college nonsense, Patricia. What are you going to study? Basket weaving? You don't have any real skills. Those words should have hurt. A week ago, they would have sent me retreating to the bedroom in tears. But now, they just made me more determined. He was so convinced of my worthlessness that he couldn't even imagine me succeeding at anything beyond scrubbing his floors and washing his clothes. I'm thinking about business administration, I said calmly. Maybe accounting. I've been managing our household budget for 35 years, without a single overdraft or late payment. I think I might be better with numbers than you realize. The color drained from his face slightly. Martin had never been good with money management. I was the one who balanced the checkbook, paid the bills, tracked our expenses, and made sure we stayed within budget. But somehow, in his mind, that wasn't real financial work because it happened inside the house instead of in an office building. Patricia, you're having some kind of breakdown. This isn't like you. You're talking crazy. There was that word again. Crazy. His go-to explanation for any behavior that didn't serve his comfort and convenience. But I was starting to understand that what he called crazy, I called sane. What he called a breakdown, I called a breakthrough. You're right, Martin. This isn't like me. The old me would have apologized by now for making you uncomfortable. The old me would have put these applications away and gone to make your dinner and pretend everything was fine. But I'm not her anymore. That night, he tried a different approach. He brought me flowers, cheap carnations from the grocery store that were already wilting around the edges. He made what passed for an apology, saying he had been under stress and maybe he had spoken harshly. He suggested we go out to dinner at the Italian place I used to love, back when he still cared about making me happy. Come on, Pat. Let's put this behind us. We're good together. We've built a good life. I looked at those dying flowers and saw them for what they were. Not a gesture of love, but a transaction. A small investment designed to get his comfortable life back on track. He wasn't sorry for hurting me. He was sorry that hurting me had consequences that affected him. Martin, do you remember what you said to me 3 nights ago? He shifted uncomfortably. I told you. I was frustrated with work. I didn't mean anything by it. You called me useless. You said I brought no value to this marriage. You compared me to a parasite. Do you remember saying those things? Patricia, you're being dramatic again. It was just words, as if words couldn't cut deeper than knives, as if 35 years of love and devotion could be dismissed as worthless, and I should just shake it off like rain. Those words showed me who you really think I am, Martin, and more importantly, they showed me who I've allowed myself to become. The flowers sat on the counter between us, their sweet smell already turning sour. He tried for another hour to convince me that I was overreacting, that college was a waste of time and money, that I should be grateful for the life we had built together. But every word he spoke just confirmed what I was learning about myself and about him. I had spent 35 years making myself smaller so he could feel bigger. I had dimmed my own light so his could shine brighter. I had convinced myself that this was love, this constant self-sacrifice, this endless accommodation of his needs while mine went unnoticed and unmet. The next morning, I submitted my college application online. The community college had evening classes and weekend programs designed for working adults. I could start with 1 or 2 classes and build from there. For the first time in decades, I was planning something for myself, investing in my own future, instead of just maintaining everyone else's present. Martin's reaction was predictable. He oscillated between anger and manipulation, between threats and promises. One day, he would tell me I was being selfish and irresponsible. The next day, he would bring home expensive gifts and talk about taking a vacation together. Just the two of us, like we used to do. But I wasn't the woman I used to be anymore. That woman had been grateful for crumbs of attention. That woman had been so starved for approval that she would have abandoned her own dreams for a weekend trip and a piece of jewelry. This woman, the one I was becoming, recognized manipulation when she saw it. 3 weeks later, I got my acceptance letter. I was going back to school at 57 years old, and I had never felt more terrified or more excited about anything in my life. The letter came on a Tuesday, the same day of the week that Martin had called me useless. It felt like the universe was offering me a chance to rewrite my story. I called Denise immediately. "Girl, I am so proud of you I could cry," she said when I told her the news. "Mama would be over the moon. She always said you were the smartest one in the family, just too kind for your own good sometimes." "I'm scared, Denise. What if I'm too old? What if I can't keep up with the younger students? What if Martin's right and I really am useless outside of this house?" "Patricia Ann Johnson, you listen to me. You have been running a complex operation for 35 years. You've managed budgets, schedules, medical appointments, social obligations, home maintenance, and a difficult husband, all while making it look effortless. You think those young students have those kinds of organizational skills? You think they have your life experience? Baby sister, you're not behind them. You're ahead of them." Her confidence in me was like oxygen to someone who had been suffocating. I had been so focused on what I couldn't do, on all the years I had spent away from formal education, that I hadn't considered what I could do, what I had been doing all along. That evening, I cooked Martin's favorite meal: pot roast with vegetables, cornbread from scratch, and apple pie for dessert. But I wasn't doing it to apologize or to smooth things over. I was doing it as a goodbye, a farewell to the woman who had measured her worth by how well she served others. "This is delicious, Pat," Martin said, cutting into his second helping of roast. "You see, this is what you're good at. This is your talent. Why do you need college when you can cook like this?" I watched him eat the meal I had prepared, watched him enjoy the fruits of my labor, while simultaneously dismissing the skill and effort it required. He could acknowledge that the food was good, but he couldn't acknowledge that creating it required intelligence, planning, creativity, and competence. In his mind, cooking was just something women did naturally, not a skill that could be developed and perfected over time. "Martin, I got accepted to community college. I start classes next month." His fork stopped midway to his mouth. "Patricia, we talked about this. I thought you had come to your senses. I have come to my senses. That's exactly what I've done." He set down his fork and looked at me with the kind of stern expression he usually reserved for business negotiations. "I forbid it." The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire. Forbid, as if I were a child instead of a grown woman, as if he had the right to control my choices, my growth, my future. "You forbid it." "Yes, I forbid it. You're my wife. Your responsibility is to this home and to me. I won't have you running around town, pretending to be some college student at your age. It's embarrassing." Embarrassing. Not to me, but to him. My growth, my education, my attempt to better myself was an embarrassment to him because it didn't fit the image he wanted to project. The successful businessman with the obedient wife who stayed home and made him comfortable. "Martin, I wasn't asking for your permission. I was informing you of my decision." His face turned red, the way it did when someone at work challenged his authority. "Don't you dare take that tone with me, Patricia. I work hard to provide for this family. The least you can do is show some respect." "I have shown you respect for 35 years, Martin. I've shown you so much respect that I forgot to respect myself. But that's over now." He stood up from the table, his chair scraping against the floor. "If you go through with this college nonsense, there will be consequences. Don't think I won't follow through." "What kind of consequences?" "Financial consequences. If you want to be independent so badly, you can figure out how to pay for everything yourself. See how far your little savings account gets you then." There it was, his ultimate weapon, money. He was threatening to cut off my access to the resources I had helped build, the security I had helped create through decades of careful management and sacrifice. He was going to punish me financially for wanting to grow as a person. "Are you threatening me, Martin? I'm telling you how it's going to be. You want to act like you don't need me? Fine. Let's see how true that is." I looked at this man I had loved for 35 years, this man I had built a life with, and I saw a stranger. Not just a stranger, but someone who was actively trying to hurt me. Someone who would rather destroy me than see me flourish. Someone who preferred a diminished, dependent wife to a strong, growing partner. You know what, Martin? You're right. Let's see how true that is. The next morning, I opened my own bank account at a different bank. I transferred my savings, small as they were, and started the process of separating my financial life from his. It wasn't much money, but it was mine, earned through my careful stewardship of our household, saved through my diligence and planning. I also called a lawyer, not because I was ready to file for divorce, but because I wanted to understand my rights. I wanted to know what I was entitled to after 35 years of marriage, 35 years of contribution to our shared life. The lawyer, a kind woman named Angela who specialized in family law, listened to my story with the patience of someone who had heard similar tales many times before. "Mrs. Johnson, in this state, you're entitled to half of the marital assets. That includes the house, the retirement accounts, the investments. Everything that was built during your marriage is considered jointly owned, regardless of whose name is on the paperwork." "But I didn't contribute financially," I said, still carrying Martin's voice in my head. "Ma'am, you contributed in every way that matters. You enabled his career by managing the household. You saved money through careful budgeting. You maintained and improved the property value of your home. You provided services that would have cost thousands of dollars if hired out. Your contributions were financial. They just weren't paid." Her words were like a revelation. I had been contributing financially all along. I had just been doing it in ways that our society doesn't always recognize or value. But the law recognized it. The law understood that a marriage is a partnership, and both partners contribute to its success. Martin didn't know about the lawyer consultation. He didn't know about the separate bank account. He was operating under the assumption that his threats would be enough to control me, that the fear of financial insecurity would send me back to my old role as his grateful, subservient wife. He was wrong. My first day of college was on a crisp September morning. I had chosen 2 classes to start: Introduction to Business and College Mathematics. I dressed carefully in a new outfit I had bought with my own money, clothes that made me feel confident and capable. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who was ready to learn, ready to grow, ready to discover what she was truly capable of. Martin had left for work without saying goodbye. His latest attempt to punish me through silence and withdrawal. But his coldness didn't hurt the way it used to. I was beginning to understand that his approval had never been worth the price I was paying for it. The college campus was bustling with students of all ages. I had expected to feel out of place, ancient among the 18 and 19-year-olds. But as I walked to my first class, I saw other older students, other people who were starting new chapters in their lives. I wasn't alone in this journey. My business professor was a woman about my age, who had started her own consulting company after 20 years in corporate America. She welcomed the class with warmth and enthusiasm, making it clear that she valued the life experience that older students brought to the classroom. "Learning doesn't stop at 22, she said, looking directly at me and the other non-traditional students. In fact, some of the most successful business leaders are people who came to their careers later in life, bringing wisdom and perspective that can only come from living. I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt valued, not for what I could do for someone else, but for what I brought to the table as myself. My age wasn't a limitation. It was an asset. My experience wasn't worthless. It was valuable. The mathematics class was more challenging. It had been almost 40 years since I had done algebra, and I struggled with concepts that seemed to come naturally to my younger classmates. But the professor was patient, and I discovered that I wasn't as rusty as I had feared. The same logical thinking that had helped me manage household budgets and solve daily problems served me well in mathematical problem solving. After my first week of classes, I came home energized in a way I hadn't felt in decades. I was learning new things, meeting new people, challenging myself in ways that had nothing to do with making someone else comfortable. I was growing, and growth felt like coming alive after years of being dormant. Martin's reaction was predictable. He alternated between ignoring my enthusiasm and actively trying to undermine it. When I talked about my classes, he would change the subject or leave the room. When I brought home textbooks, he would make comments about how much money I was wasting. When I stayed up late studying, he would complain about the light keeping him awake. "This is affecting our marriage, Patricia," he said one evening as I worked on a business plan assignment at the kitchen table. "You're never available anymore. You're always buried in those books." I looked up from my work and really saw him. This man, who had spent years taking me for granted, was now complaining that I wasn't available to be taken for granted. This man, who had called me useless, was now upset that I was proving my usefulness to myself. "Martin, when was the last time you wanted me to be available for something other than cooking your meals or cleaning your house?" He couldn't answer because there was no answer. He didn't miss my company. He missed my services. "That's not the point," he said finally. "The point is that you've changed. You're not the woman I married." He was right about that. I wasn't the woman he had married. I was becoming the woman I was meant to be all along, before I had gotten lost in trying to be everything he needed while forgetting what I needed. "The woman you married was 22 years old, Martin. Did you expect her to stay exactly the same for 35 years? I expected her to remain devoted to her family. I was devoted to my family. I was so devoted that I lost myself completely. But devotion shouldn't mean self-destruction. That night, as I lay in bed next to a man who felt like a stranger, I thought about the woman I had been when we met. She had been full of dreams and ambitions. She had wanted to travel, to learn, to make a difference in the world. She had been confident and independent, qualities that had attracted Martin in the first place. But somewhere along the way, those qualities had become inconvenient for him. My independence had been gradually eroded through subtle criticism and not so subtle control. My confidence had been chipped away through years of being told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too demanding. My dreams had been dismissed as impractical, selfish, unrealistic. I had allowed it to happen because I thought that's what love looked like. I thought that becoming smaller was the price of keeping peace. I thought that sacrificing myself was the same as sacrificing for my family. But love shouldn't require you to disappear. Partnership shouldn't mean one person grows while the other shrinks. A good marriage should make both people better, stronger, more themselves, not less. 3 months into my college journey, something beautiful happened. I discovered I was good at this. Really good. My professors praised my work ethic, my insights, my ability to connect theoretical concepts to real-world applications. My study group valued my contributions and sought my advice on projects. I was excelling in ways that had nothing to do with how well I served others, and everything to do with my own intelligence, creativity, and determination. I was proving to myself that Martin had been wrong about my worth, wrong about my capabilities, wrong about what I had to offer the world. But Martin couldn't see it, or wouldn't see it. When I made the dean's list after my first semester, when I came home excited to share my achievement, he barely looked up from his television. "That's nice, Pat. What's for dinner?" "That's nice. 4 decades of marriage, and my biggest academic achievement in 35 years was dismissed with, 'That's nice.' Like I had mentioned that the weather was pleasant, or that I had seen a nice bird in the garden. I realized in that moment that he would never celebrate my successes because my successes highlighted his failures. My growth made his stagnation obvious. My joy made his misery apparent. He needed me to remain small and unfulfilled because my limitations made his own limitations less noticeable. But I was done making myself small for anyone's comfort. I was done dimming my light so others could feel brighter. I was discovering who I was when I wasn't defined by my relationship to someone else, and I liked the woman I was becoming. I was strong. I was intelligent. I was capable. I was worthy of respect and love and celebration. And if Martin couldn't see that, if he was so threatened by my growth that he would rather tear me down than lift me up, then maybe it was time to stop letting his opinion of me matter more than my opinion of myself. The woman who had stood in that kitchen 6 months ago, devastated by being called useless, was gone. In her place stood someone who knew her own value, someone who wouldn't accept less than she deserved, someone who was finally ready to demand the respect she had been giving freely for 35 years. And if that scared Martin, if that made him uncomfortable, if that challenged his view of what our marriage should look like, then so be it. I was done managing his emotions at the expense of my own growth. I was done being useful to everyone except myself. The acceptance letter from the state university arrived on a Thursday morning, thick and official in my hands. 4 years of community college had led to this moment. A bachelor's degree in business administration with honors, and now graduate school beckoning. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Martin had dismissed my dreams, and felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Pure, undiluted pride in myself. Martin barely glanced up when I shared the news. "More school? Patricia, you're 61 years old. When does this nonsense end?" But his words bounced off me like rain off a roof. I had built myself an armor of self-worth that his criticism couldn't penetrate anymore. 4 years of academic success, of professors who valued my contributions, of classmates who sought my wisdom, had shown me what respect felt like. I wouldn't accept anything less ever again. The transformation hadn't been easy. Those first months of college had been filled with doubt, with moments when Martin's voice in my head told me I was too old, too stupid, too behind to succeed. But slowly, assignment by assignment, semester by semester, I had proven him wrong. I had proven myself right. My accounting professor, Dr. Williams, had pulled me aside after my final exam. "Patricia, you have a natural gift for financial analysis. Have you considered pursuing your CPA certification? The field needs more mature professionals with your insight and work ethic. A CPA me." The woman Martin had called useless was being encouraged to become a certified public accountant. The irony was so perfect, it almost made me laugh. I enrolled in the graduate program that fall. Martin's protests had grown louder and more desperate as my success became undeniable. He could no longer dismiss my achievements as hobbies or phase I was going through. I was building something real, something valuable, something that belonged entirely to me. "You're destroying our marriage," he said one evening, as I worked on a complex tax analysis for my advanced accounting course. "This obsession with school is tearing us apart." I looked up from my calculator and spreadsheets, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. This man, who claimed I was destroying our marriage, had never once asked about my classes, my goals, my dreams. He had never celebrated my achievements or supported my growth. He had never shown any interest in the person I was becoming. "Martin, what exactly am I destroying? When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you asked me how I was feeling about anything other than what I was cooking for dinner?" He shifted uncomfortably, unable to answer, because we both knew the truth. Our marriage had been dead for years. I had just been too afraid to admit it, too invested in maintaining the illusion of partnership, to acknowledge that I had been living with a stranger who saw me as a convenience rather than a companion. "I work hard to provide for this family," he said, falling back on his old defense. "I deserve to come home to a peaceful house, not to find my wife buried in homework like some teenager." And what do I deserve, Martin? What have I deserved for 35 years of making your life comfortable? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with decades of unspoken resentment and unacknowledged sacrifice. He couldn't answer because in his mind, I deserved nothing beyond the roof over my head and the food in the refrigerator. I was supposed to be grateful for basic survival while he lived fully, but I was living fully now, perhaps for the first time since I was 22 years old. I was learning, growing, discovering capabilities I had forgotten I possessed. My professors respected my opinions. My classmates valued my contributions to group projects. I had been elected treasurer of the Graduate Student Association, a role that would have been impossible for the invisible woman I had been just a few years earlier. The night I graduated with my master's degree, summa cum laude, I sat in the auditorium surrounded by families celebrating their loved ones' achievements. Martin had refused to attend, claiming he had to work late, though I had seen him at home watching television when I left for the ceremony. But I wasn't alone. Denise had driven 8 hours to be there, tears streaming down her face as I walked across that stage. My study group was there, cheering as loudly as any family. Dr. Williams was there, beaming with pride at her star student's success. As I held my diploma, I thought about the woman who had stood in her kitchen 5 years earlier, devastated by her husband's cruelty. She could never have imagined this moment, could never have believed she was capable of such achievement. but she had been capable all along. She had just needed someone to believe in her, even if that someone had to be herself. The job offers started coming in during my final semester. Local accounting firms had heard about the mature student who was graduating at the top of her class, who brought decades of practical experience to complement her academic credentials. They wanted me, not my services as a wife or housekeeper, but my professional skills and expertise. When I accepted a position at Henderson & Associates, one of the most prestigious accounting firms in the city, Martin's reaction was explosive. "You can't be serious about this job nonsense, Patricia. You have responsibilities here. You can't just abandon your duties to go play career woman at your age. Play career woman. As if my graduate degree was a toy. As if my professional qualifications were pretend. As if my success was just an elaborate game I was playing to annoy him." "My duties?" I asked calmly. "What duties would those be, Martin? Cooking meals you barely acknowledge? Cleaning a house you never thank me for maintaining? Organizing a social life you take for granted? You're my wife. Your duty is to support me, to make our home a comfortable place for me to relax after working all day. And what about my comfort, Martin? What about my dreams, my goals, my right to a fulfilling life?" He stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. The concept that I might have needs, wants, aspirations beyond serving his comfort was so foreign to his understanding of marriage that he literally couldn't process it. "This is what marriage is, Patricia. This is what we agreed to when we took our vows. We agreed to be partners, Martin. We agreed to love and honor each other. But you haven't honored me in years. You've taken me for granted, dismissed my contributions, and treated me like hired help. That's not marriage. That's employment without benefits." I started work at Henderson & Associates on a Monday morning in September. Walking into that office building, wearing a professional suit I had bought with money from my new savings account, carrying a briefcase filled with the tools of my trade, I felt like I was walking into my real life for the first time. My colleagues welcomed me warmly. They had heard about my academic achievements, my unique background, the fresh perspective I brought to the field. Within weeks, I was handling complex client accounts, providing insights that impressed even the senior partners. "Patricia," Mr. Henderson said during my first performance review, "you have an intuitive understanding of financial management that can't be taught in school. Your clients trust you because you understand the real-world implications of financial decisions. You're exactly what this firm needed: trust, respect, professional recognition. These were things I had been starving for without even realizing it. For decades, I had convinced myself that Martin's acknowledgement was enough, that being appreciated in my own home was sufficient. But experiencing genuine professional respect showed me how empty those years had been. Martin's resentment grew with each passing month of my success. He couldn't understand how I had transformed from the woman he had called useless into someone who commanded respect in the business world. He couldn't reconcile his image of me as incompetent with the reality of my professional achievements. "People at work are asking me about my wife's new career," he complained one evening. "It's embarrassing. They think I can't provide for my own family." "Maybe you should tell them the truth, Martin, that your wife is successful because she's intelligent and hardworking, not because you're inadequate. This isn't about you being successful, Patricia. This is about you making me look bad." And there it was, the heart of his resentment. My success wasn't about me at all, in his mind. It was about him. My achievements were an embarrassment to him because they challenged the narrative he had constructed about our marriage, about my capabilities, about his role as the superior partner. Martin, if my success makes you look bad, maybe the problem isn't my success. He couldn't hear me. After 40 years of marriage, he had become so invested in seeing me as lesser that my growth threatened his entire sense of self. He needed me to be small so he could feel big. He needed me to be dependent so he could feel necessary. He needed me to be unsuccessful so he could feel accomplished by comparison. But I was done shrinking to fit his insecurities. I was done managing his emotions at the expense of my own growth. I was finally living for myself, and no amount of his disapproval was going to make me go back to being invisible. The final straw came on a snowy February evening. I had been working late on a particularly complex audit, solving problems that had stumped other accountants, when I came home to find Martin entertaining his brother and several colleagues from his office. They were in the living room, drinks in hand, laughing about something that stopped abruptly when I walked in. "There she is," Martin said, his voice carrying that tone of condescending amusement I had learned to recognize. "My wife, the college girl. Still playing accountant, Pat? Playing accountant." In front of his colleagues, in our own living room, he was diminishing my professional achievements, reducing my career to a hobby, a game, something unworthy of serious consideration. "Actually," I said, setting down my briefcase with deliberate care, "I spent the day solving a tax problem that saved our client over $50,000. How was your day, Martin?" One of his colleagues, a man I had met at several company parties over the years, looked genuinely impressed. "50,000? That's serious money, Patricia. What kind of tax issue were you working on?" Before I could answer, Martin interrupted with a laugh that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Bob, don't encourage her. She'll talk your ear off about depreciation schedules and tax codes. Women and their little hobbies. You know how it is. Little hobbies." In that moment, something crystallized for me with perfect clarity. This man, this husband I had devoted my life to supporting, would never see me as an equal. He would never respect my achievements, never celebrate my success, never acknowledge that I had value beyond my usefulness to him. More than that, he was actively working to undermine me, to diminish my accomplishments in front of others, to reduce me back to the invisible woman he preferred me to be. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying a strength that surprised even me, "I need to speak with my husband, privately." They filed out with the awkward efficiency of people who sense they've witnessed something they shouldn't have. When the door closed behind them, I turned to face Martin, with 40 years of accumulated resentment crystallizing into diamond-hard resolve. "How dare you?" I said quietly. "How dare you mock my career in front of your friends? How dare you dismiss my achievements as hobbies? Patricia, calm down. I was just having a little fun with the guys. You're being too sensitive again. Too sensitive." The phrase that had silenced me for decades, that had made me doubt my own reactions, that had convinced me I was overreacting to treatment that would have been unacceptable from a stranger. "No, Martin, I'm not being too sensitive. I'm finally being appropriately angry about being disrespected in my own home by my own husband. Look, if you can't take a little teasing about your job, maybe you're not cut out for the working world after all." And there it was, his final, desperate attempt to make me doubt myself, to convince me that I was the problem, that my expectation of basic respect was unreasonable. But I knew better now. I had spent 5 years discovering my own worth, my own capabilities, my own right to be treated with dignity. I had built a life outside of this house, outside of this marriage, That had nothing to do with his opinion of me. I looked at this man I had loved for 4 decades and saw him clearly for what he had become. Not a partner, not a supporter, not even a friend. He was an obstacle to my happiness, a drain on my energy, a person who would rather destroy my confidence than examine his own behavior. You know what, Martin? You're absolutely right. I'm not cut out for a world where I have to pretend my achievements don't matter to keep other people comfortable. I'm not cut out for relationships where I have to stay small so someone else can feel big. That night, I packed my bags for the last time as Martin's wife. 40 years of marriage ended not with screaming or tears, but with the quiet dignity of a woman who had finally learned her worth. I moved into a beautiful apartment downtown, close to my office, with windows that let in more light than I had seen in decades. Martin called constantly those first weeks, alternating between rage and desperate pleas. You can't leave me, Patricia. We can work this out. I'll change. But I had heard those promises before, and I knew better now. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. 6 months later, I met Jermaine at a community volunteer event. He was helping serve meals at a homeless shelter, sleeves rolled up, treating every person with the same respect, regardless of their circumstances. When he learned I was an accountant, he didn't dismiss it or mock it. He was genuinely impressed, asking thoughtful questions about my work, my journey back to school. You must be incredibly strong, he said, to start over like that. That takes real courage. Courage. Not crazy, not too sensitive, not embarrassing. Courage. Jermaine thanks me every morning when I make coffee. Not because he expects it, but because he appreciates it. He celebrates my professional victories like they matter, because to him, they do. He sees my worth, not in what I can do for him, but in who I am as a person. Last night, Martin called. His voice was broken, desperate. Patricia, please. I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything. Please come home. I listened to his tears, his regrets, his promises to change. Then I said the words that set me free completely. You chose this, Martin. You chose to see me as useless when I was irreplaceable. You chose to mock my dreams when you should have celebrated them. You chose to tear me down when you could have built me up. Every single day for 40 years, you made choices that brought us to this moment. Now, I'm making mine. I hung up and turned to Jermaine, who was reading quietly beside me. He looked up and smiled, that warm smile that says, I'm valued, I'm seen, I'm loved for exactly who I am. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't what you do to someone who hurt you. Sometimes it's showing them exactly what they lost when they had the audacity to call you worthless. My name is Patricia. I'm 62 years old, and I finally understand that I was never the problem. I was just married to a man who couldn't see diamonds when they were right in front of him.